Now,
So I'm talking to Michael Falcone. He's the filmmaker behind the Hall of Giants documentary, which is been nominated at our festival in Nice. Congratulations, well done.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Well, thanks for your time, Steve.
So yeah, if you could just give us a brief synopsis of what this documentary is about, and then we can just sort of go from there.
Sure. It's a documentary. It's basically about a very popular public art piece in Seattle. It was made in 1990 for very little money, and it became a huge success, and it's second only to the Space Needle in terms of popularity. It's like how many people visit it.
Yeah.
So the documentary is ostensibly about it being an underground success story, but it's also about the endurance of public art and what public art can do for a neighborhood, because that piece actually really did help define a neighborhood in Seattle called Fremont. It really helped define that as an artist's neighborhood. But unfortunately, it was kind of a victim of its own success. That's a region that a lot of the artists can't afford to live in anymore. It's a very it's an old story.
So that's very much what's happening all over the place. The UK's a prime example, like Brixton in London.
Yeah.
And now, forget it, you won't have a better bomb, it's just horrifically expensive.
Yep.
Now, there's any number of projects you can choose to film about. I mean, it's endless. I imagine you're looking at projects all the time, but what in particular drove you to actually make a documentary about this piece of art in particular?
Well, it was circumstance. Just a bit of background. I'm originally from Chicago.
Yeah.
And my sister-in-law at the time, previous marriage, lived in Seattle. I came out to visit a few times. Mm-hmm. And we visited the neighborhood of Fremont because they do a parade every year, the Fremont Solstice Parade. It's on solstice. And it's a very popular parade. It brings out as many as 100,000 people. But it's done on a wing and a prayer, and again, very little money. And it's put on by an outfit called the Fremont Arts Council, which, thank you, Fremont Arts Council, that's why I'm here. So I went out to see a parade. I thought the parade was neat. And when I came back out to live here, to live in Seattle, I came across the volunteer coordinator, and she said it was the 20th annual parade this year. And I said, well, I'd like to actually see if I can film some of that and some of the story behind it. So I did that. And then I became on the Fremont Arts Council board.
Right.
And once I was a board member, it became the 20th anniversary of the Fremont Trolls being created. So I said, has anybody ever done a documentary on that? And they said, no.
Because you could have, I assume, did you think about actually doing one about the actual...
Well...
Because I guess that crossed your mind.
I set out to, and I have tons of footage, I set out to cover not just the parade, but the people behind the parade and all the organization that goes into it. I was not quite experienced enough to pull it off. I was pretty new to doing independent filmmaking on my own and not being part of somebody else's production. So I shot a bunch of things, and I didn't have enough background, and basically it didn't go anywhere. I made a nice trailer, but it didn't ever go anywhere. So I said, well, maybe someday I can make it right. But then the Fremont Trolls birthday came up, and I'm like, okay, this is the film I can do. It's a contained subject.
And it's a static piece.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The parade was nuts. I was running all over town to different places that, marching bands were practicing and dancers and stuff. It was chaotic. The Troll was confined.
Yeah.
And plus I knew the Arts Council pretty well at that point, and so Barbara Lukey, who is one of the people that brought that parade up from Santa Barbara, California to Seattle, she was the volunteer coordinator with the Fremont Troll, and so I got to know Barb, and Barb basically doled out a bunch of leads, like here's who you talk to, and here's their contact, here's the background, here's the story on the Troll, and she basically laid out a bunch of information, and it was just up to me to connect the dots and craft a story from there.
Because I'm assuming that even before you shoot a frame of film, you have to do a shed load of research.
Oh yeah.
And how long did the actual research take, and then how long did the film take to put together?
I think I spent 6 months researching.
Wow.
And basically trying to get names of, there were a lot of people that were involved in the building of the Troll.
Yeah.
So it was trying to find out who the original artists were behind the Troll, and then who helped them, what their connections were, what their background was. It was quite a bit of research. And then I did a ton of photographic research, archival research, etc. So I would say 6 months spent. gathering information before I even got an interview on tape. And I did pre-interviews too.
Oh, you done pre-interviews?
I did, and it seemed duplicitous to do it, but it actually really helped me, and it helped the subjects that I was interviewing because they had somewhere to go. And one thing I learned in a class I audited on filmmaking is part of the pre-interview is you ask them, do you have some materials that I could possibly...
Some pictures or something like that. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And plus they get to know you, and it's not like they're starting cold.
Yeah, what a great idea, yeah.
Yeah, so...
And of course you can separate the wheat from the chaff, because some of them, I guess, you might be thinking, this isn't really what I want.
Right.
And there's nothing negative about that, it's just a fact of life, isn't it? And then, and so you've kind of stopped yourself wasting even more time by, I get that.
Yep.
So, okay, 6 months research, and then how long to put the whole thing?
Well, that was a long process. I started this film in 2010, and the current and final cut didn't come out till 2015.
Right.
So the actual editing of it, I got a grant from the city of Seattle. It was a Seattle City Artists grant. And I basically had roughly a year to put out a cut that would satisfy the grant. So it was a good year's time of heavy editing and interviewing. And then
because a year sounds a long time, but I know it's not, because it will go like that, won't it?
Yeah, it was intense. I'm in a band too. It's called Sea Star. Plug. Hello, Sea Star. I miss you.
Hopefully they're watching.
They might be.
I don't know. It's about, what's Seattle? It's about 8 hours behind, is it?
9 hours.
9. Oh, unlikely.
There's an early riser in the band, but short story is I was in the band, and I was editing this film on a 2008 MacBook, not a Pro, a MacBook. So
how is that up to the task? Because I mean,
it's not.
It's not, is it really?
No, no, it was in no way up to the task. And I knew I had somebody in line to do the finishing editing, but I really wanted to build as much of the story on my own as I could.
Yeah.
I wanted to get at least a good story rough together before I handed it off.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time. I was renting a house, bottom half of a house, and I was at a porch. And I spent a lot of time chain smoking and editing on my porch because I was getting cabin fever.
Yeah, and stressing out.
And I remember during the winter taking like these $2 gloves I got from a store and like cutting the fingertips off so I could edit.
Oh, no.
Because I couldn't stay indoors
Seriously?
anymore, and I had to take a 2-month hiatus from the band, and we gig fairly regularly.
To finish it, to actually put?
To get it in the can, at least that cut.
Yeah, how many versions? Because I know documentaries often have like 3 or 4 different versions.
Let me think. So the original cut was 1 hour and 41 minutes.
Right.
Then I made a cut that was about 1 hour and a half.
Yeah.
And then I made a cut that was about 1 hour and 10. Then I made a cut that was 50 minutes because our PBS affiliate in Seattle.
So it's broadcast length, I guess.
Yeah, the public broadcasting. They were interested in the movie. They didn't take it in the long run, but they needed a 50-minute cut. So I had to pare it down considerably, which was quite a lesson because the problem I had with the film originally is that there were too many storylines, too much going on. So I cut it down to 50, but I felt like there were some pretty key things missing.
Right.
Then I added back in roughly 10, 11 minutes to its present cut today. So what are we talking, like half a dozen? And there was actually a short version too, which hasn't really done very well. But,
well, because there's just not enough in there, I guess. Or you need to have them all. Yeah, I guess. Yeah. And was it pretty much, I know the story you wanted to tell about do I refer to it as a sculpture? What's the best way to refer it to?
Technically it's a statue.
Right.
It's a ferro cement. Ferro cement is used in ship making. It's cement and sand roughly. And you can do some pretty neat stuff with it. You can do some sculpting. And the statue it's framed with rebar.
Right.
So you start basically with a rebar frame, you get your footings in, you dig your footings in, like a building.
Yeah.
And the troll is actually hollow, which I didn't know.
Yeah, no, I see. Now you've said it, it makes sense, because why would you have solid? It would be a nightmare, wouldn't it?
Well, most statues are solid.
Right.
As far as I know. But this is not. They did it basically, it's essentially a shell. So the rebar is formed to do the basic outline, and this is in the movie too. And then there's basically...
We call that a facade. I don't know if you call that a facade.
It is, yeah, it is.
You know.
And then it's basically hung in between with hardware cloth, which is basically like deluxe chicken wire. You know, so you've got your ways to kind of do your general shaping. And then you apply the ferro cement with like a hose. I think it was a stucco equipment that they used to lay it in. And then you have trowels on the other side to kind of capture, so it doesn't go all the way through. So you have basically the outside shell being formed, and then the inside's being pressed in. And it's all the rebar is sealed because that helps it to prevent it from deteriorating. And so you're winding up with the shell. And there's definitely some sculpting and some like troweling that happens on the outside because the troll has hair. It's the troll. So you go and you do that kind of fine detail work on the outside when it's still drying.
And it was everyone that you approached happy to contribute, or did anyone say, I don't really, it's not for me?
There was one of the original artists that did not want to be interviewed on camera. He said he'd be okay with doing voiceover, but I thought it would be a little awkward I wasn't sure how to work with that.
Yeah, I can see how that would be, because someone would be thinking, why aren't you on script? Because I would be thinking, why isn't that guy? And it seems a bit odd.
If there isn't that visual reference, then it is kind of unusual. So, and he's a great guy. I mean, he gave me some really excellent slides of the troll being built, and he just said, I didn't want to be on camera. So I said, okay. So he's referred to in the film, but he isn't featured in the film. But everybody else was game. One of the artists doesn't live in Seattle. She lives in Missouri. Down at Walter.
So that's a bit of a mission, isn't it?
And I had some ideas on how to do it. We had a plan where I was going to go at the University of Missouri, like go with a film student and like have him do a remote shoot. It just, because of the grant, I just was running out of time. So ostensibly I got the lead artist, Steve Bedanes, who was very, very cooperative and good about giving me anything I needed. And then his assistant at the time, Ross Whitehead, who was, Steve was architectural visiting professor at University of Washington. And then he had his protege that was also working on the troll. So they were totally game with it.
And do you think you've told the vision of the story you had to begin with, because you must have had something in your mind's eye, is the end result, does the end justify the means? That's not what I'm asking, but is the end result what you wanted it to be?
Yes, and it's more.
Right. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly didn't think I'd have a feature, but when I started interviewing these people, a lot of them were talking about the times that bore the troll. Why was the troll made to begin with? Why in Seattle? Why then?
And what is that reason? Why did they build it?
It is the troll. You can't tell by looking at it, but it's basically a monument that is anti-gentrification.
Right.
So when the troll was built, real estate values doubled in Seattle in 1990. Like from the years 1988 to 1990, they doubled.
In 2 years?
Yeah, 2 or 3 years. They just skyrocketed, and it's happening again right now.
And it's gone up even more so, of course. I know, it's obscene, it's ridiculous.
Crazy. So the troll was, trolls by myth, by legend, they just don't like to be bothered. They're generally peaceable unless they're aroused and they're bothered. So the troll sits under a very, very popular, busy highway in Seattle.
Yeah.
And so the troll is under the bridge, and he has a Volkswagen, which is an actual Volkswagen in his hand.
Right. What Beetle? Is it a Beetle?
It's a Beetle.
It's
a Beetle Volkswagen in his hand, and the symbolism is he reached up on the bridge and grabbed one of the cars down.
Right.
And was keeping it for his own, maybe to eat it, as one kid thought when he looked at the statue.
And it's interesting because that gives a really idea, because we're talking about a huge scale here, and even if you haven't seen the film, just saying, I know because I've seen it, but just grabbing the car should give you an idea in your mind of the scale of the project.
A Volkswagen Beetle fits in the hand of the troll. That gives you some perspective. It's 16 feet tall.
Right.
It's a big structure, and it's not a whole troll. It's basically, and that was one of the things that made it easier to build. It's basically the bust of the troll. It looks like it's coming out of the ground. So it's the bust of the troll, the shoulders, the hands, and the head. So if the whole troll was visible, it would probably be on the order of 25 feet tall.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. But it's not.
And I know this is all about the promotion of this film, but I'm guessing you're doing a new piece now. If you can't talk about it, I totally understand.
Sure.
But
No.
are you working on another documentary?
I just finished a short called Kids Toys, which is based on a rare toy museum in Portland, Oregon.
Yeah.
It's a 13-minute short.
A documentary or
It's a documentary.
Right, okay.
Yeah. I've only really, my interests and my penchant are in historical documentaries. That's what I find interesting. I have an English background, and I've done a lot of research papers. My wife, who is one of the reasons I'm here today and was able to complete this film, because I was going nuts. We met each other in grad school. We have a long history, and right now she's working on school stuff. But
Yeah.
I have a background in crafting research papers, so I kind of approach documentaries as a research paper. And what I did...
Yeah, because I can see the correlation there, because really what you're doing is talking about something that's real,
Yeah.
frankly, aren't you?
It's a text.
Yeah.
Film is a text. I'm certainly not the first person to think of that, but I treat it as a research paper in that it's the same thing. You're gathering sources and materials. You're making connections to form an idea that is supported through your sources, and your push is basically your own thesis. It's research, basically. It's a research paper that is a visual text. So what I did with the Troll movie, and which I've done since, which is laborious but it works, is I've done a written transcript of every interview.
Oh, no.
Every interview.
How long does that take? How would you have
Forever.
the patience to do that?
I had a little help, but mostly it was me typing up, and I'm not a transcriptionist. I know people in my work do that, but it takes a long time.
But if you've recorded it, which I assume you have, why? I suppose the question is, why would you do that?
Why would you do that?
Yeah.
Because shifting through film and finding different parts of the film takes a while. If you have, for me, because again I'm word-based, if you have a script that you can work from, and I actually took the transcript and I broke it down into an Excel sheet where I had the first cell was the basic logistics of who was talking, what they were talking about.
Yeah.
And so with that Excel sheet, I was able to shift around
Yeah.
the different
Yeah.
pieces and the different storylines so I could kind of build my story.
Right.
It was very laborious to get to that point, but once I got to that point, I was able to craft a narrative that was more malleable. You have to understand my tech also is really antiquated. Before I handed it off to my finishing editor, it was a 2008 MacBook, so the wheel of the beach ball, the wheel was going round and round a lot.
Spinning all the time.
Yeah, it was one of the I felt like I was getting hypnotized. So having that to begin with and starting from that script was, I think, another reason why I'm here and fortunate to be here is because I could make a narrative. Because I had a lot of different storylines to work with.
But
So I'll pull it together.
Have you never thought about making a fictional piece?
Yeah, I've
It's
written.
going to cross your mind, isn't it?
It's, I'm a creative writing major, so it's sort of odd that I'm into documentaries. I have a couple scripts that are narrative scripts. I think narrative film, my hat's off. I've talked to a few of the filmmakers here. My hat's really off to people that can pull off narrative filmmaking. I think it's really tough. Documentaries, you can pull a lot out of them, and the kernel of your story can remain. You can do a lot of recrafting. I think narratives are much harder to do. And you're also working with actors and different takes, and it's tough. It's tough to do a narrative. I've worked on narrative features, and I want to do it someday, but I kind of feel like I'm not ready. I'm not quite ready. I feel like I'm much more prepared since I've done these things, but yeah, sure, I've thought about narratives.
And how do you make sure that I suppose the question is really post-production, but how do you make sure when you finish the film you haven't missed something that's really important to the story? I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah, well, you screen it for people. I did a lot of pre-screening. The reason why this film has been cut down and down is because it started out as a 1 hour and 40-minute cut. Now it's 61 minutes. You get feedback. You see people that are shifting around too much. You see people that get up. You talk to people. I did pre-screenings where I was completely out in the open. I'm like, do your worst. Tell me what you think. And I was fortunate in that I had honest criticism, and supportive, but honest criticism about it. It was more to me about knowing what too much was.
Yeah.
It was scaling it back.
Yeah.
And once I got to the point where I felt like the essence of the story remained, but it wasn't too expletive, then I felt like this current cut, I think, does its job. It was about pulling things out rather than what did I miss.
Yeah.
I started large so that I didn't miss anything, and then I realized what I could miss.
And I shouldn't really ask this question, we're going anyway, because it's always difficult to answer this, but I'm particularly intrigued with documentary makers. Do you look at other films? Is it a documentary that you completely look at and say, I really wish I'd have made that, or that's such a great story, or really... So I guess I'm kind of asking you if you have a favourite, without asking if it's a favourite, because I think it's always a hard one to answer.
Do I have a favourite documentary? It's hard to say. I mean, Touch the Sound was a pretty amazing film. I'm not going to get into the details of what it's about, but ostensibly it's the first documentary I saw so much crafting, because documentaries have changed so much. They used to be more like educational films.
Yeah.
They were about gathering information. Touch the Sound was like the first one I saw that it was more about how it makes you feel, the impression that you get from the subject matter, the feel of it, and it wasn't about gathering information. It was like a narrative in that it was an experiential experience. That was pretty neat to see. I don't watch as many documentaries as I should. Who can? There are so many.
Yes, like film, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't really have a true favorite. I like different styles. I don't like documentaries that are too flashy. There's a lot of flash animation going on in the editing world.
Yeah, we see quite a bit of that, actually.
Yeah.
That's crept in.
It's great in that it illustrates things. I just think in the internet age, it's getting very flash and dash, a lot of style, no substance. I don't like seeing that so much. I haven't seen Montage of Heck, which is the documentary about Kurt Cobain, but it's very stylized.
You have, or you have?
I have not,
no.
but I've seen trailers, I've talked to people, it's very stylized. I'm more after the story. I don't like things the artifice that gets, the scrim that gets in the way of the story. I want to see the story more than I want to see the flash. So it could be that documentaries are going in a direction that I think people will learn from their mistakes and they'll pull it back.
Yeah.
Or not. It just may be the future.
Michael, that's it. Thank you
right.
very much.
Thank you so much.
Brilliant.
It's almost like a member of the family in a way. But I was always actually quite surprised when the guys on the panel said, we've got to do the troll. And I was kind of shocked that I had to gulp and do it.
I think we probably thought we'd be visiting more than the Space Needle. It maybe is.
I say that eventually it'll overtake the needle. I told Steve Bodanis that when we were building it. The needle's there, so what? You take a picture of it. But the troll, you take a picture of while you're standing on its shoulder.
So Trolloween, somewhere early on, we publicized it. And about 3,000 people showed up, and they trashed the neighborhood.
The Fremont Arts Council, which was sponsoring the competition, contacted us and said, we don't believe you can actually build that.
And so a lot of artists showed up, including myself, that said, hey, let's get a project together.
So there was a public vote, and there was a design build team that put in a proposal, and it was for the troll.